Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the GB R-1 Racer. It's a 1/32 scale kit from the Williams Brothers, and it's kit number 32511 in the current catalog. It's seen a number of reboxings, but it's still available from Williams Brothers if you'd like to get one. It consists of nearly 70 detailed plastic pieces molded in gray and one clear canopy piece. The radial engine is a multi-piece construction unit which allows for added detailing. And the fuselage features recessed panel lines, and the kit comes with colorful waterslide decals for two versions and illustrated instructions. Now the GBs were probably the best known of the Golden Age American racer aircraft, and they were produced by the five Granville brothers, from which the name GB was derived. It was powered by an 800 horsepower Pratt & Whitney Wasp Senior engine. When finished, it's about 6.5 inches long and about 9.25 inches in the wingspan. Here are the contents of this kit, and some people would call this an open box review. They'd pick up each part or sprue and try and explain them, but that won't help you build the kit, now will it? We're going to do that. And as you can see, the decals are pretty colorful, the registry is very good, and we're going to suggest that you use some of the aftermarket setting solution for these, as some of the decals are large and fit over panel lines, etc. Now the first thing to do is take the parts and wash them in some mild soap and water, and then let them air dry. We'll be using Model Master liquid cement for most of the construction, sometimes super glue, and occasionally white glue for a clear piece. Now you should always remember to use the manufacturer safety and use guidelines when using any of the products that you see or hear used in the review. Carefully remove the engine components from the sprue, making sure that you don't cut the sprue off too close to the part in order to avoid destroying any of the details. Using some of the liquid cement, go ahead and assemble and glue the center and the rear of the engine halves together. The prop had some pretty distinct sink marks on the back side, and you can fill that with your favorite putty and then sand it off smooth for a nice finish. After I had dried the putty and had a light coat of primer on it, I decided to use some of the Alclad chrome type paints to finish it off. And so then I painted the first coat here with a gloss black, and then after that was done, I decided to use what's called an Alclad chrome in very light coats, followed by some flat black to the back side of the prop. You'll find some light flash on the cylinders, so after those are cleaned up, I sprayed mine with some flat black, and then I sprayed the crankcase with some acrylic neutral gray. Assemble the 9 cylinders to the crankcase, and after that had dried, I applied some color wash of blacks and browns to simulate oil stains on it. The pushrod tubes for the front of the crankcase had a lot of flash on them, and to increase the realism, I actually removed them and replaced those with some 600th size brass tubing. Now to get the black color, I soaked the brass in a product called Blacken It, and then the exhausts were so small that I temporarily glued those to a piece of styrene and painted the exhaust stacks with some steel colored paint, and the ends of the pipes got a little touch of flat black. Next, I installed the pushrod tubes with some liquid glue, and I also made some spark plug wires for the engine using some wire, just some copper wires, and attached that with some of the crystal clear glue available from Micro. Now I also glued the exhaust stacks to the engine with some super glue. The engine cowl had a couple of bad spots that I filled with some putty, and then the engine and the cowl would be ready to be installed into the airframe after it gets painted. Get these components out for the cockpit and remove them from the sprue trees. Then we're going to paint the roll cage structure was some chromate green, and the bulkheads on the GB were made of wood. So I painted the bulkheads using some Tester's enamel wood color. Now we can work with the throttle mixture and control stick and the rudder pedals, etc., and the trim wheel. And we're going to paint those with gloss black, followed by a coat of alclad chrome. And then the knobs were painted blue, black, and red. Because the attachment points are small, I used some super glue to assemble the cockpit, and then I applied the instrument panel decal. Now the cockpit is ready to be installed into the airframe after it's painted. Gather up the pieces that you see here to start with building the undercarriage components, and glue the tire and the wheel halves together using some liquid cement. Then paint the tires with some enamel rubber and the wheels with some enamel aluminum. Now place the tires and the wheels between the wheel pant halves, and then apply some liquid cement to the wheel pant edges there, and set that aside to dry with some clamps to keep it in position so that the wheels will rotate later and the halves will be glued together properly. After I had this assembled, I masked off the tires, but I noticed that there were some seams on the pants, wheel pants there, and some low spots. So I went ahead and added some putty to those and sanded them off. The undercarriage then will be ready to paint and installed after the painting is completed with the fuselage. Now we'll begin work on the airframe, and that includes the fuselage halves, the cowl, the panels there, of course the wing halves, and the stabilizer pieces. After we've got that assembled, we'll be adding the canopy, which I dipped into some future floor care and then wicked it off and let it dry. It gives it a nice clear, crisp look. Glue the wing halves together using some liquid cement, and then glue in the pitot tube to the leading edge of the left wing. Paint the inside of the fuselage halves some flat white. Use some super glue and locate the mounting points there with the headrest at the back of the canopy opening, and install the right fuselage, the cockpit into the right fuselage half using the super glue. Next we can glue the fuselage halves together using some liquid cement, and then use some small clamps or clothespins, etc., to clamp the fuselage together so that it stays in position, allowing the glue to set. As always, you'll find some seams that will need some attention. So use your favorite putty. This is the Squadron White, and I just used that on the seam, spread it on there, let it dry, and then finish it off. Additionally, the tail wheel piece had some sinks in it that I addressed with some putty to finish that off smoothly too. Now we can add the wings and the horizontal stabilizers to the fuselage, press them into position, and make sure that they have a proper angle to each one and correspond to each other for symmetry, and then let those dry. And then the canopy was applied using the micro scale crystal clear glue into position, along with some masking that I just used a blade to put some masking on and cut out where the frame was for future here. We'll work on painting the outside, and I needed a piece of wood here that I shaped to fit into the engine mounting hole to hold the airframe while I was painting it. So then I applied a coat of light gray primer, and this gives you a good idea of how your seams are going to look. And any seam that needs attention gets some more putty and finishing. And since the wings were removable to transport the aircraft to each race, I didn't fill the wing root seams because that's actually more authentic. I used some 800 grit paper followed by some 1200 grit to finish off the putty and then the 1200 for an overall sanding, I then applied another coat of primer to the entire airframe. I made a photocopy of the instruction sheet and cut out the templates for the paint job. And then those were then transferred to 1/1000th dimension frisket film. Next, I painted the entire airframe with flat white, and then after that had dried, I applied the frisket film masks that I had made previously. I used some of the blue painter's tape to finish up the masking, past the frisket areas, and then I painted the airframe with insignia red paint from Testers. I also included some of the other parts that would need to be painted red at the same time, like the tail wheel and the cowl, etc. So you can see those pieces here. Go ahead and spray those at the same time with your red paint. After the coat of red paint had thoroughly dried, I removed the frisket film and the masking to reveal the paint scheme. And there was a few areas that needed a little touch-up, which you can do with a small paintbrush. I sprayed the airframe with some of the future floor polish to give it a sheen, along with the undercarriage and the cowl. Now it's time to choose what markings you want to use and apply the decals to your model. As you can see, they're pretty large, and so I used some of the micro scale solvents to help those decals nestle into contours and stick properly to the body. And then let those air dry at least overnight before working on the model again. After the model decals have dried overnight, give the entire airframe a coating with the future floor polish again to seal the decals into place. Now once that's dry, you can glue the engine and the cowl and the undercarriage to the airframe using some super glue to keep that in position. Next, I added the rigging, which aside from the paint job is probably the most difficult part, but I made it a little easier by using some music wire. It's about, I think, 10/1000th diameter, and the holes marked number 1 here are molded into the fuselage and the wings. So start by making a slight bend with one end of the music wire, and this bend goes into a hole on the wing. Then place the wing wire into the hole in the wing and rotate it, getting it as close to the fuselage hole as possible. And this shows how long the wire needs to be. Cut it about 1/8 of an inch longer than is actually the distance to the hole. Now bend the end of the wire that was just trimmed about 1/8 inch short of that end. Make sure to bend it in the same direction so that the first bend in the wire would be straight from the top view. Now place the wire into the holes and evaluate the length. If it's too long, the wire will be bowed between the holes, and if it's too short, you'll see your bends before they enter the holes. So when you're happy with the length, apply some super glue to the end of the wire and install it. Now take your time. The spreader bars marked number 3 here were made from some plastic rod about a 32nd inch in diameter and then glued on with some super glue. And the king posts marked number 4 here, the vertical wires, were cut to length and then glued on with some super glue as well. Well, there you have it. These great little model kits from the Williams Brothers are still available from their website, and they really encompass the golden age of air racing from back in the 30s. I just love putting these kits together, and they go together very nicely, but they do have some sinks and some flash that you'll need to address. And they continue to offer them in new boxings, so they're always available. But if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this step-by-step premium model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook and our website right on replicas.com. Thanks.